next speaker is a local community activist and candidate for city council and a fan of Metro Route 43. Please welcome Kshama Sawant.
Kshama Sawant. I am a member of Socialist Alternative, which is a nationwide organization of activists fighting for social and economic justice. In addition to being a fan of Route 43, I'm also a fan of the Transit Riders Union. So let's have an applause for them. And I remember seeing many of you last at the funeral for the right-free zone last year. And I think we should remember that, because we have to keep in mind that this recent logjam in Olympia over funding for such a basic service is only the most recent in a series of systematic cuts to social services and the social and economic infrastructure of this city and of this state and of this country. It's part of this process. And so let's not lose sight of the fact that our battle is not only going to be to find a source of funding for this recent round of cuts, but it has to be an all-out fight for our standards of living. This is what this is about. I would like to ask the politicians in Olympia and in this city, when you talk about the revenue crisis, what is this crisis you're talking about? Don't we have a situation where corporations are making record profits more than before the recession began? Don't we have the wealthy getting wealthier by the minute? So why do you have a crisis in revenues? I think the crisis in revenues is not a crisis in revenues, but it is a crisis in leadership. Yes, the Republicans are, we are very clear which side they stand on. They do us that favor. They make it very clear they stand on the side of the wealthy, the minority elite, which gains from the system. Boo! Yes. But the question that we have to ask is, where is this leadership that is going to fight against that voice? Where is the voice in the city government and in the state government that will advocate for the interests of the rest of us 99%? And if you have a revenue crisis, then why don't we have people there fighting to tax the wealthy? Why aren't we taxing the rich? Why aren't we taxing corporations? Why is it that when they say that there's no money to fund a basic service like a bus, a mass transit service, there's more than enough money to give corporate subsidies? Corporate taxes are at historic lows, and then more and more land in the city is being given away to billionaire developers like Paul Allen. And we're told that, oh, there's no money for basic health, there's no money for bus service, there's no money to have a low-income fare, there's no money to have a right-free zone, there's no money to fund homeless shelters, there's no money to fix the potholes, there's no money for education, there's no money for childcare, there's no money for early childhood education. This is the whole gamut of social infrastructure that is under attack, because we don't have a leadership that is actually going to advocate for the rest of us. And I think we should be thinking about that. And I know that many politicians have come and spoken here before me, but let's be honest, they are part of the problem. They have been part of the leadership. Why is it that you hear them talking about this and addressing these rallies only in an election year? That has something to do with it. Why is it that the rest of the 4 years, they're never out here talking to us and fighting for us, but out there hobnobbing with big business and real estate developers? That's the question we need to ask. And what we need is our own leadership. We need our own grassroots leadership. And I wanted to give you an example of how we can do that. Our campaign for City Council is a grassroots campaign. We don't take any corporate donations. We are activists fighting for working people like the rest of us. We're fighting for the unemployed. We're fighting for students who are struggling with student debt and low-wage labor. We're fighting for women who are struggling to put food on the table and yet care for their children and fulfill their obligations with 2 jobs. And so if you can look at this city, I mean, yes, in Olympia they'll tell you that, it's the big bad Republicans. But what about Seattle? Why aren't politicians fighting at the city level for these things? What is stopping the city government from saying that we will create a tax on millionaires to supplement the funding for Metro at the city level? There is no law that stops them from doing that. And that is what we are talking about. I don't know if you're aware, but King County as a whole, which Seattle is part of, includes more than 68,000 millionaires we have sitting right here. What is stopping them from taxing them? And if you do the math, even a very modest tax rate on their ultra-high incomes will create more than enough funding to fulfill not only the 17% cuts that are staring at us, but also to create funding for expanding mass transit, which is what we should be talking about. And to fund education, and to fund public housing. I mean, look at the levels at which we are being attacked. Not only are we being told, forget expanding mass transit, they're talking about cutting the existing transit, they're cutting existing funding for the transit, but on top of that, look at the cost of housing. How many of you think your rent is too high? So we have a system in this city where people are being pushed out of the city center because they can't afford the rents anymore. They're being pushed into 2 or 3 bus transfers away from their place of work or the schools where they have to drop off their children every day. And on top of that, the cost of healthcare and so on. So I think the theme of this discussion should not simply be how can we save the existing metro, how can we fight the 17% cuts. No, we should reject that kind of defensive fight. It's time to go on the offensive. And fight for our rights. This city is completely capable, given its wealth and its productivity and its technological advancement, to fund all our rights. What's missing is our own leadership. So we need to be out there, not defending what we have, but demanding full funding for Metro, full funding for education, full funding for all the social services that we need. And that is why our campaign is also fighting for a citywide $15 an hour minimum wage. And I agree with Berita. Enough with the Band-Aid, car tab solutions. No more Band-Aid solutions. Let's have systemic solutions to these problems. And I invite you all to fight with us. This campaign is not about me. This campaign is about all of us together fighting for our rights. So please join us and let's be in solidarity.